Welcome back from placement. I hope everybody enjoyed the last few weeks in schools. I wonder what sort of approaches to learning across the curriculum you have experienced. I'd love to hear about it, so drop me an email if you saw something really exciting. If not, talk with Beck and Emily about your particular experiences. The curriculum planning process that I'm outlining in this video has its basis in Jay Wiggins and Grant McTighe's Understanding by Design framework. Reading Chapter 9 of your Learning to Teach textbook, the chapter by Karen Malone on planning, will add depth to the concepts that I'm outlining here, and it reinforces approaches that I've outlined in the previous online lectures. You could also refer to the Understanding by Design readings on this week's workshop page under Going Further. Welcome back from placement, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the last few weeks in schools, and I wonder what sort of approaches to learning across the curriculum or integrated curriculum you've experienced. And I wonder if any of you have experienced anything that remotely resembles the sorts of ideas that we've been sharing with you in this course so far. I can't wait to hear about it, so either email me directly about some amazing things that you've seen or talk about it with your tutors in class in the next couple of weeks. The curriculum planning process that I'm outlining in this video has its basis in Jay Wiggins and Grant McTighe's Understanding by Design framework. Reading Chapter 9 of your Learning to Teach textbook, the one by Gloria Latham and everybody else, the chapter's written by Karen Malone, that will add depth to the concepts that I'm outlining here, and it reinforces approaches that we've already outlined in previous videos for this particular course. So I guess my approach with this lecture is to try and tie together the separate bits that have come beforehand. If you want to read further, we'll put up some additional readings about Understanding by Design on your course website over the coming few days under the Going Further heading. I want to start with the overview of the unit planning process that can apply to any unit of work, not just problem-based or challenge-based learning, and not just your assessment task 3. There are 3 key steps, and they run counter to some practices that you might have seen in schools on your placements or to your own approach up until now. Often it is really tempting to build a unit of work around some really cool activities that you've dreamt up, or that you've come across on Pinterest or on the internet somewhere. But you need to resist this temptation and begin at the beginning, which ironically is actually beginning with the end. Your planning should always start with where you want the students to end up. Your planning then moves on to answering the question of how will you know? How will you know if students have achieved the desired results? What will you accept as evidence of their learning, and importantly, their ability to transfer that learning to a new context or a new situation? Because that's what we mean by learning. It's not just a short-term remembering stuff. It's being able to go, oh, I know how to do that, and I know about that, and I understand that, and I can apply that understanding or that knowledge or that skill to a different context and bring that with me. And then you get to the fun stuff, which is about designing the really cool activities that hook the students in. Now, I know that throughout this course I have banged on endlessly about this process, but I think it's really important. And each of the lectures that you've gone through, or a lot of the lectures that you've gone through, are designed to reinforce this particular process. Just to refresh your memory, the choice of the big idea is the starting point, but that's actually the interplay or the result of the interplay between the students' needs, the students' interests, and the curriculum frameworks. What is the curriculum suggesting that you need to teach, and how can you connect that to the interests of the students and the needs of the students? So as a teacher, your job is to know what your students' learning needs are and what they're interested in. Another big part of your job is to understand what the curriculum is saying that the students should learn. You need to bring these factors to identify that big idea that will engage your students in deep learning. Then you develop the scenario or challenge. What can you create that will engage the students in developing that enduring understanding about something that is really significant? What essential question about the big idea will drive the students' learning? For your assessment task 3, we're asking you to choose from one of the 4 scenarios that you all investigated in the first part of the course. So we're asking you to come up with an inquiry process for that particular, one of those particular scenarios. Even though you worked on that same inquiry with your group, when you turn that into your own unit plan, your ideas for assessment, what the driving in questions are, what the activities and what resources you use, that's where you get to be creative and innovative on your own. So we want to see your capacity to be able to do that yourself. We've developed a template for you to use in developing a problem-based or challenge-based learning unit, an inquiry unit. We've provided a blank copy on the Learning Across the Curriculum website for you to use for your AT3. We've also provided an annotated template where we've developed a series of clarifying questions that act as prompts for the sorts of things that you need to think about at various stages of planning your unit. We've colour-coded each section of the unit plan to correspond to one of the 3 steps that I've outlined in this particular lecture. Our suggestion is that you start with your big idea. What's the big idea that is underpinning your particular unit of work? Then, what are the key concepts that will be evident within the unit? Maximum of about 3 key concepts that will derive from this particular big idea. Then, what are the key questions, the focus questions, or what Wiggins and McTighe called the essential questions? What are the questions that you'll develop that will guide your inquiry or your students' inquiry? And from that, you then can derive your learning intentions. Now, the learning intentions, 3 to 5 of them only. Don't make them at this level too specific on a single tiny little thing. Unit learning intentions need to be of a higher order, a slightly broader intention. When you come to planning individual lessons, not for this assignment, but for your own practice, that's when you can drill down into more specific, highly focused learning intentions. You also need to be able to outline a particular scenario. For your AT3, you must choose one of the 4 scenarios that you have explored in the first part of this course, and you're being asked to turn that scenario into an inquiry unit. And you can adapt how you do that. That's entirely up to you. If you were using this template as a planner for a different inquiry unit, this is where the scenario area is where you would outline what that scenario is. And remember, that scenario needs to hook your students in. The final part of this, I mean, of course, you'll fill out this stuff, but that's pretty level, duration, and your name. That's pretty standard. This is the final part of step 1, the unit title. Now, we recognise that not everybody has a talent for those snappy, catchy unit titles, and it isn't the most important component, but a catchy title can also be used as a hook that helps excite the students and gets them involved in this new unit of work. So see if you can come up with something that's engaging. So step 2 of the planning process, I've already outlined in the assessment lecture, and that's knowing how you will know if your students have met the learning intentions that you set out in step 1. How will you know that they have developed an understanding of that enduring concept or that big idea that is at the core of your unit? So we need to consider in advance the evidence that we will need to gather that documents and validates that those targeted learnings have been achieved. How will we know the students actually get it? What mix of assessment do we need to plan throughout the unit to check for students developing understanding, and at the end of the unit, their summative understanding? So in this process, you need to be considering your assessment strategies under the headings of assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment of learning, not just assessment of learning. When we know where we want the students to end up, we can sharpen and focus our teaching so that whatever activities we plan are specifically designed to help the students develop the understandings that we intend. In your unit planning template, assessment is dealt with in two ways. Assessment of learning: what will the unit culminate in that will enable the students to demonstrate what they have learned and what they now understand? But along the way, you need to identify strategies for formative assessment by you and by your students. What other assessment, both formal and informal, will you use along the way to assist you in understanding the students' growth as learners? What do you need to have in place to check for progress during the unit that might identify the need for you to intervene and undertake some explicit teaching or direct instruction to correct any misinterpretations for some students or for all students? What will you plan to put in place so that students are assessing and reflecting on their own learning at strategic points throughout the unit? The final step in planning a unit is to plan the fun stuff. And by that, we refer to that range of really engaging learning activities that you design to help the students progress towards the learning intentions that are linked to the big idea that underpin the unit. It's all connected. In problem-based and challenge-based learning, you may have a much more open-ended approach. But in any unit of work, including problem-based and challenge-based learning, there will be things that you will need to teach explicitly. There are also activities that you can plan for each phase of the inquiry process. So some questions to ask as you work through this particular step. How will we support learners as they come to understand important ideas and processes? What enabling knowledge and skills will students need to perform effectively and achieve their desired results? What activities, sequence and resources are best suited to accomplish these goals? And how will we prepare our students to autonomously transfer that learning to a different context? In particular, there is often fundamental factual knowledge that needs to be taught as a foundation for later understanding. There may also be specific skills that you need to teach in order to support your students' learning. For example, there may be some collaborative learning skills, or perhaps some technical skills, or perhaps a specific writing genre that you need to teach explicitly to support a particular piece of assessment that you have included. You need to predict what blockers there might be to the students' progress that will require your explicit support, and then design activities that help the students overcome those knowledge or skill gaps. But remember that factual knowledge and skills are not taught for their own sake, but as a means to that larger end, that understanding of the big ideas. Acquisition of content is a means in the service of meaning making, and then transferring that meaning to other contexts. So make sure that your activities will help your students to progress their understanding of the big idea. Otherwise, we risk learning becoming fragmented and disconnected and largely irrelevant. And when learning is like that, it's not called learning. It doesn't stick. We want the learning in these inquiry units to stick. We want all learning to stick. Now, what I've just talked about there is the kind of approach you'll take with any unit. A note of clarification: for assessment task 3, we are not looking for formal lesson plans or giving step-by-step guides to those activities, just a brief overview of the sorts of activities you would include in the various stages of the inquiry process. Here's what the learning activities section of your unit planning template looks like. It's the one highlighted in the orangey colour. And on the template itself, it's a lot easier to read than it might appear on this screen. Something bizarre has happened to my image. I'm not going to read through each section. From doing your own inquiry project earlier in this course, you should be really familiar with each step. However, please read the guiding questions in each section. They might help you to identify relevant and specific learning activities that you can design at each stage. Remember to keep a balance between explicit teaching and more open-ended student-directed learning, which is especially relevant in problem-based learning and challenge-based learning situations. And once again, we are not looking for detailed lesson plans. We just won't mark them. We don't want step-by-step, what will the children do in each of the sections of your unit plan. We are looking for a brief indication of the types of activities that you would plan to implement in these sections, but we don't want the detail about how those activities would be implemented. So you need to convey to us the sorts of things that you would intend to do, but without minute detail. You won't have enough words to do that. Another way of putting it is to make sure that in your unit plan you identify what activities the students need to engage in to help them develop their understanding, and importantly, what activities you need to engage in as the teacher to support your students' learning. This is required for all curriculum planning in your classroom. What will the students do and what will you do? This is the final lecture in the series for Learning Across the Curriculum. In the remaining weeks of the semester, you'll be working on your unit plan and consulting with your tutors to help you frame and develop your ideas. I'm looking forward to seeing some really interesting and engaging units. And despite the fact that you'll all be doing one of 4 topics, the way that you approach that topic will be different from how other people approach that topic. So, as I said, I'm looking forward to some really creative ways of implementing problem-based and challenge-based learning. Have fun, people.